So several of you mentioned the Electronic Communications Code and the threat that national regulatory bodies would no longer be able to regulate the market. Is this something that you only or primarily see in the position that the Council has taken, or is this also problematic in what the Parliament has adopted? So do you see a possibility for us to still prevent this threat through the negotiations with Council, or is it already kind of a lost cause in the different institutions?
Well, as far as I understand it, it seems to be a lost cause. Some points are interesting in the improvements made by the Parliament, but we are far from what is needed. The question of monopoly, as I defined it, is interesting. The monopoly is always regarded as a powerful operator in a national network or in a national market. And this is the wrong way. The powerful operator is from the customer point of view. If there is an operator with a monopoly of my very small city with 50 inhabitants, it is a monopoly, not according to the European Code. And so the national authority can do nothing, cannot force that operator to open its network. And that's a problem. There is the national authority is allowed to use regulation to enforce a few things, but only under very dramatic conditions, and they need to prove everything is wrong. And all the list of things they need to prove as wrong are not realistic. They need to prove a large-scale operator cannot come. We are not large-scale operators. The question is always like that in the code, as I have seen it. I'm not aware of every amendment everywhere. I did some work on the initial text from the Commission, and I studied a bit of the amendments. I'm not really precise on the versions that got out of Parliament. I would need to read it again. Not really an interesting reading. But we have some really key points. Another example is the way the national authority is going to make a market analysis. The study how would work an hypothetical new operator with only, a very small one, with only 1 million customers. Can it survive? If yes, then the market is sane. Everything is fine. And when we ask for studies about the prices for new operators, the question is how much costs the first line, the first subscriber. If when you on the DSL network almost 20 years ago, the first line was about 50,000 euros on the French market, which means there is no small operator, no operator under some size. The basic size was 10,000 customers. And we need to have those indicators. What is the minimum size according to the national authority analysis? It's something totally absent. You don't see in the market analysis the minimum size. You don't see the kind of service provided. The ability to host something as trivial as a website is not considered when they do the market analysis. I mean, an internet access where I can use Twitter and watch Netflix is by essence different from a network access where I can host my own website. And a website is something totally trivial and easy. And we can't suppose things more complex as the use. Can I broadcast TV from my home? With optical fiber, I should be able to do that. Can I? Why is CNN allowed to broadcast in Europe and I am not? If I have optical fiber at home, I should be able to broadcast. Can I? And that's a real question. The network neutrality is defined like that by the European text. I should be able to provide any service, and I can't. And we need more power to the national authority to create regulation on those points.
No, just because thinking, there is something which is very easy to regulate. I mean, IPs addresses belongs to a territory, right? And operators should be forced from any size to interchange the transit. That's why internet happens. So I'm a customer of Telefonica and I can connect with somebody from Vodafone, but that transit has to interchange it locally in the territory. For instance, in Barcelona, there is an interchange points, facilities for doing that. They have to do that. What's happening in the real world is that in Barcelona, when I'm getting the transit from Telefonica, it goes typically from Amsterdam or Madrid. Because if I want to change the transit with Telefonica, although they are together in the same facility in Barcelona, Telefonica asks me, a big amount of money to me to interchange the transit with them. And from them, since they don't care, they send the transit to Amsterdam and they interchange in Amsterdam. So somebody looking in this kind of tactics. So at the end of the day, what happens is that our transit has less quality, has a higher latency because it goes through hours. Nobody is looking into that. And the incumbents can use this kind of techniques to artificially, matter, and that's also affecting to the internet neutrality and making things happen, bandwidth sharing and not symmetric communication, things that have no technical reason to explain, but they do, since there are tricks that they are allowed, and nobody is looking into these things to happen. So the internet interchange and network neutrality is also very important to be looked into. And there's some simple things that could be happen. And so just for instance, a very simple statement: let's do the transit interchange locally and with fair prices. When I'm saying difference, I mean, to give you an example, 1 gig of a carrier, level 3, Tata, Cogent, these companies in Barcelona, 1 gig it costs less than 2,000 euros for internet transit. If I ask the same to Telefonica, they were asking from local transit, already in Catalonia, not international, and those companies were giving, the full internet table. They were asking 20,000 euros a month. So more than 20 times more for local transit. That's stupid. And that's happening in the real world, but nobody cares. So those things can be also addressed.
I have a question. Internet is a global network, and there is a lot of traffic, for example, from United States or North America and Europe. And it goes through cables, I believe, or through satellites. I am not expert. But which companies are owner of all that? It's not Google, it's not Netflix. I understand that you do not like them very well. Which company are making this business?
Oh, a lot of them. Several large-scale companies are owning the undersea cable. Usually, this is the market which is the most opened. There are something like 10 or 20 undersea cable from USA to Europe. And each of those cables is made of thousands of optical fiber, and each of those optical fiber has different operators. So you have dozens of companies who are working on that market, and those companies are extremely open. Some names were given about purchasing transit. When you purchase transit, you can talk with Cogent or Tata Telecom, which are worldwide groups, and all non-profit organization can work with them without problem. We are customers at Tata Telecom for some of our transit. Some of the organizations are working with Cogent, some are working with, well, almost everybody, except the old European phone companies. We cannot work with Orange in France, we cannot work with Telefonica in Spain, we cannot work with those companies. The international companies are used to having various size of customers. I mean, when you provide network in a very small country, you do not have 10 million subscribers. And Cogent and Tata Telecom knows how to work with you. Orange does not, and they don't want to. And it's a way to create a kind of closed market. So the international companies building the network are quite open.
There's a question from Agnès, and then
I wanted
okay.
to add something.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one comment. The point you are touching, which is global, technically we call them tier 1 operators, do not care about final customers. While Orange, Telecom Italia, Telefonica are used to work with the final customer. So they are in a position where they are both service provider for a community network and competitor to reach the client. And that is one of the things where regulations can help separating more properly who does what. This is something that has been analyzed since many years in the building of telecommunication services and business, the so-called vertical integration. When you have a vertical integration, you don't properly separate the task and the economics behind each task. So this is, again...
Well, the French historical operator is a very good example of that. Orange is on one side targeting end users, people. They are also on the wholesale market, and they choose their customer on the wholesale market. They accept to work with large-scale companies. They don't accept to work with us. They are also working on the international transit market, where they are known as Open Transit, which is one of the tier 1 in the world. They are also working as a submarine cable company, as a part of the Alcatel submarine group, which is one of the very few companies in the world capable of creating a transatlantic cable. And in fact, they are present in every market, and they make choice, and they are usually not regulated. Only the end user market is regulated, and it is regulated poorly, with a notion of openness of the market, which is, from our point of view, wrongly defined, because it is defined on a global market and not from the end user point of view.
And yes, you want to do something?
Yeah, it was just for replying on the about the code and the current version of the code. The current version from the European Parliament is not so good today, but it leaves room for the national regulation authority to regulate monopolistic situation and to take into account the community networks if they want to do it. So there will be room for interpretation, probably not the same implementation in all countries, depending on the position of community networks and position of the historical big telcos. It's the same for the sharing and unlicensed spectrum, some room for developing it, etc. Problem is that so they will have to interpret the code. And we see, for example, for the net neutrality regulation, that interpretation can bring lots of problems. And as you know, the problem now is that the council has a very position. They will pull hard for diminish the regulation possibilities, and depending. So there is room to keep something not completely bad, but probably not to get something good now. And I don't know if there will be lots of possibilities for MEPs to control what is done by Pilar del Castillo as well. But that's it.
Thank you. No, you're gonna have something to say.
But I wanted to get back to Wi-Fi for EU. So if you want to say something to this question now, no. Okay, just wanted to argue about this question whether or not there should be a password on a public Wi-Fi. And to make it very short, I just want to say that it's useless, because if it's a shared password, then you can share it with anyone. If the aim of the password would be to identify the person, then private people would have to check passwords or IDs of other people, which in Germany at least you are not allowed to do. And so it only adds bureaucracy and complexity to the whole initiative, and I just want to stress that it doesn't make sense, and it would be good to get rid of this.
Other remarks or questions?
Maybe just the problem for the Wi-Fi for EU regulation is that it's adopted now, so there is no room for getting back to it.
So the wording is still vague enough for the
Yeah.
EU Commission to have some room in
Probably.
interpreting the provision, and maybe coming up with a system that is not too bureaucratic and flexible enough.
From our point of view, Wi-Fi for EU sounds like European Commission is going to ask the operators which failed to provide internet access in the countryside to do it. So they are going to ask the losers to lose a game in exchange of a lot of money. It sounds like a good plan.
Unless maybe community networks try to put a foot in the door.
Yeah. Just a small question on this, because I haven't followed in great detail the Telecom code, but previously, actually 2 legislators ago I did, for example, with the functional separation, that whole debate, which basically failed. There was no separation at all. They talked about stopping the monopolies, and they were totally squashed, to the point that they wanted to push Vivian Redding out from being commissioner for pushing that agenda so much. But what I'm kind of concerned about is that the visibility of your demands on the debate of the telecommunications code, I wish it was more visible. I know everyone has their own jobs, and like you said, it's difficult to get to Brussels and this and that, but talking to some of the people who were in the negotiations here in the Parliament, your demands and your worries were not visible at all. No one even heard about them, practically. About many of the issues, whether it be the spectrum issue, the competition issue, the access to the infrastructures, all these kind of things. So I don't know what would be needed. I don't know. And I know your limitation. It's not a criticism of you. I'm saying what would be needed for that to work out. And when I see the netCommons, what you're working on in Horizon 2020, it's really a pity that those kind of things don't even get to the policymakers often, who are debating these kind of things. And so what would be needed to make these ideas more visible?
So just very quickly, before giving you the floor, but there's one report by netCommons that will touch on the advocacy capacity building needed for community networks to get more visibility. And that's part of our work.
And in partnership, netCommons and La Quadrature, you drafted several notes and guidelines on these specific issues. So indeed, it's it's
and
a pit. Yeah,
and
it's
we
a
met
pity.
many MEPs.
Yeah.
So we met many MPs. We had a lot of discussion. We were there with some of them. So we were there, just not enough. And we weren't listened to. So.
So what would be your recommendations with? I mean,
Romain wanted to say something, and maybe David will.
Yeah, the question is how to get out of the ghetto, and create more than a ghetto, bigger village.
In fact, you should process the questions the other way. Ethno has a permanent office in Brussels and has an easy access to the Commission. We don't, and we can't, and it has no meaning. I mean, some of our organizations are providing internet access for very small villages with 200 or 300 inhabitants. We cannot have a permanent representation in Brussels. It's totally insane. But it should be a mission for the national authority to know about it and to relay our demands and to understand our demands and to process the demands from Orange and the demands from FFTN and to present something coherent to the Commission. I mean, it's the work of the Commission to know what is happening in Europe. It's not our work to spend a lot of time to inform the poor Commission.
Ideally, you're right.
Yes, please.
Hi. So I haven't said anything yet. My name is Marit Palaverta. I'm from the Internet Society based here in Brussels. And I know that you work with some of my other colleagues in the past years. I just had a comment here. So we have a small office here in Brussels, and we have tried to talk to some people in the institutions about the community networks. And my big issue in terms of positioning this to the European institutions is that I haven't found anywhere an estimation of the importance of community networks on an EU scale vis-à-vis the connectivity agenda. So the European Commission, the Parliament, they look at the EU as one entity, and they understand that there is a gap in terms of good internet access, but and community networks can be one solution to address that gap. But there is no, as far as I know, any estimation of how many people, how many projects, which countries, in terms of percentage, that I was able to find.
I want to say something regarding to this. I mean, in Catalonia, there was a public institute. It is a public institute following, the KPIs for the digital agenda. They were following, thousands of indicators by doing public surveys to the counties. Grouping by counties, not municipalities, but counties, comarcas, we say there. And from beginning 2000, you can imagine the internet. One of the questions was internet adoption at the homes. And 2000, beginning 2000, was very much a metropolitan area, was much more ahead from the rural areas. In Catalonia, we are still small. I mean, as a community, like I said, community networks are by definition small. But in certain counties, we reached, after the time with fiber optics and so on, 15% of the share, and that was reflected. So what had happened in 2013, 10 years after, that some of the counties that we are not above from the metropolitan areas, and that's what numbers given from a public, survey institute. We're even above the European average. 2013, Uzona, which is the place that we were ahead, and that was we didn't done the 100%, but the 15% that makes a difference, and those are data. But you know what happened after that? That data was released in 2013 and was never released anymore. They didn't like, so in the next surveys, they don't give that granularity to show that they changed the way that they do the surveys. And so after that, we don't know. So we know, I can give you numbers, that in 2013, just 10 years after, because of network, the impact, a rural community with just 100 inhabitants, so we just had, about 10,000 homes connected. But it made the 15% that jumped from the, the back to the head of the urban areas, and even ahead of at that time was 80%. Was slightly, it was the only county in Spain that actually was above the European average of the 28 member states. But those numbers were released in 2013, and after that, that particular survey was not done again. And so when there is no number appears, somebody that you don't know, we don't have control because of, you have to say, they change the way, and they say that it's not important to give the numbers with the granularity of counties. So
no, I just think that there's, I mean, with this group, of course, there's a lot of knowledge, but I also saw that the European Commission, they give these broadband awards every year. And on that website, on the best practices, I saw at least 20 community network type projects. I don't know by whose definition, but and also in Finland, Sweden, I'm from Finland, where there are a lot of areas, rural areas, and not a lot of population. So I think it would be extremely useful to have a kind of common idea, where are these projects, and in terms of the percentage, and perhaps have a couple of countries, a kind of deep dive into Spain, as you are very active, and show a couple of examples, and that would really help us also to formulate and be more forceful with the influencing and
Judy
the advocacy.
Someone else wants to say something?
I just wanted to stress that for me at least, community networks should not always be seen as access networks, because we laughed for Netflix and Facebook, but many of these community networks that we are proud of just offer access to Facebook and Netflix. I mean, but what is important about them is that they bring the governance and the options to build local services, and they create the communities that could design them and they could provide them. So it's much more than, in my mind, than internet access. It's just that it's a little bit more steps away, but we should not forget this. And because you mentioned a lot about rural areas, I think we should always think also of this, the analogy with food. Leandro mentioned a little, and for me, community networks are like organic farming, that we don't know how it was in the past, but it's a progress of the future. And on the other side, we have all these, I call them algorithmically modified data providers.
Oh, yeah.
And perhaps the Commission should enforce some signaling on Facebook that can, that it contains algorithmically modified data.
Just one reaction from Benjamin and then Leandro, and we'll move to the conclusion.
Yes, one point, not just in the same aspect, is we create skills, we create skilled people. We have more engineers capable of routing internet in our organizations than I have met at Orange when I worked there. We do create skilled people, and we create them not only in one office, in one building, but everywhere in our organizations, in urban areas, in rural areas, everywhere where, when there is a community network, there are a bunch of people who know how to operate a network, who know how it works, and who are learning, and who get access to knowledge. It's not only about the human relationship, as say Mr. Beauvais, but also about distributing skills. We know how to build a network. If you need to build a network after an earthquake somewhere in France, you have to hope there is someone from the FDN Federation to help, because we know how to do it.
Leandro.
Yeah, mine is a kind of practical comment. Some years ago, I learned about the existence of an organization called the European Internet Forum. And I found it a nice idea that members of the parliament have an organization that is defined as independent, not-for-profit, and non-partisan. But then I look at the membership fees, and I look at the list of members, and I was not that sure anymore. So, I mean, if you see the names, I think the voices are not, that doesn't represent the interest of the citizens. They represent the big players, they represent even the players from other continents. And of course, I mean, it's very expensive to be a member, but if you're big, it can be free probably if you are an associate member that is very small. When I look at the associate members, some of them look weird to me, but I don't know them. Some of them might be nice. There is not even a single community network there, and probably even if it's free, doesn't mean that we have the time to participate. Maybe it should be supported, especially if the members of the European Parliament want to have a independent, non-profit and non-partisan and have all the different representations. I think there is an instrument. I don't know how much money is moved by this organization, but I think they should have the resources to make sure that all the voices are heard.
Yeah, but this is the Pilar del Castillo is quite involved in it, I think.
You think this is negative?
Really, yes, for community networks.
I think so too, yeah.
Well, thank you very much on that note. We'll move to the conclusion.